Hello everybody, it's Leanne again at Quilters Cupboard. Guess what time it is? It's time for a new, but wait, there's more video. Haven't done one for a little while, not since we did our Christmas videos, etc. So I have a new one that I want to share with you guys, and it is called the corner beam. It may be new to lots of you. It's not new to Deb Tucker and all of her rulers, but it's not one that I've shared before. I'm not sure you've seen it in any of my blocks or any of my quilts that I've put up on the wall for you to see. So it is a very cool shape. As you can see, I've got a couple of them on the table in front of me here, and I've got a couple of samples on the wall behind me. It is a very unusual shape, and it looks completely different in the two different quilts. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So the shape that we're going for, that we're looking for, is this little guy here. So this as an individual corner beam block used to be something that you would get if you were paper piecing. But now, of course, Deb Tucker's created a ruler that when you put a bunch of them together, you can have a very cool looking, almost like a star that one creates with a dark center beam and the light sides. You've got exactly the same block over here, but the colors are reversed. And so now we've got a dark center beam and we've got different light and medium colored side triangles. So that's what makes up the block here. Individually you can see it, and I'm going to walk you through how we're making those pieces and trimming them. But it is really cool to see how different they look with different values where your light and your dark are, as well as mixing up the colors and not having it quite as controlled as this one is. So let me show you how it's done. We have got a ruler that looks like this. It's got an interesting angle on the side. It's got information for trimming on the square corner. It's got information for cutting your sizes and what sizes you're going to start with for your components. Something I want to point out to everybody is this particular ruler, for all those eagle-eyed people, my ruler actually says Spotlight on it. And way back when these were very first brought onto the market, Deb called them Spotlight. And she decided she wanted to change the name of it and put a couple of extra little markings on it. By that time, I had already jumped on the bandwagon, already had my ruler, had already taught several classes in it. So I know some of you have got a Spotlight ruler out there because we were all so gung-ho about everything Studio 180 related. So just know that if you have a Spotlight, it is the same as the corner beam ruler. I'll show you a little bit of what the difference is when we get to the trimming down stage. So the shape is exactly the same. As you can see, the shape and the size of it is exactly the same, just mine says Spotlight and her newer ones say corner beam. They're not brand new, they've been on the market quite a while. I just didn't need to buy a new one because mine was working so well, as you can see by some of the samples that I've made. Just wait until you see some of the really fancy gussied up ones that I've got to share with you. Because you know, for me, everything is about doing so much more with your tools. So what I want to point out is on the ruler, we've got some information that talks about the sizes of what we're going to start with for components. And in this case, we are going to, if I'm making, let's see, I want to, on down here in front of me, I want to make some 5-inch finished units. So on the ruler, it tells me that for a 5-inch finished unit, I'm going to cut strips and squares that are 6 inches. So this means that we want to think about which component is going to be in which spot so that you pick the right fabric for the right color to start with. In this case, the square, in every case, the square is what's going to turn into the beam that's in the center. So make sure that you cut the square from the fabric that you want to go in there. And the strip of fabric is the same size height-wise, but it's going to be left as a strip, and that's going to become your side triangles. So my pieces here are laid out to help me walk you through what we're going to do with them. And we'll get some some close information from the ruler as to what we're doing with it. So the very first thing that I want to do is cut out my center beam. So I call this the center beam of the block itself. The whole block is called a corner beam. So on the ruler, we've got information. She's always really good about giving us information on the lines to show us what we're lining up. So we've got a line here that says, if I put it over top of the light colored fabric, it says center beam trim number 1. And there is also a center beam trim number 2. Now what I'm going to do is, it's a dotted line. I happen to have 2 pieces of fabric here. You can cut 2 at a time. I try not to go more than that because I worry about the fabric wiggling and shifting a little bit. You want the angles on the sides of this to stay precise. So you don't want so high a stack that you're going to have them shift and then they're going to end up with not quite the right angle on it. When we trim, we're trimming the outer edge, but we want the sides to actually stay in the right spot. So we're going to look at the line that says center beam trim number 1 first, and we're going to line that dotted line up along the edge of our square. Remember, we're dealing with a square, and we're going to have the bottom of my 6-inch square laying underneath the line that says 5-inch finished unit. And see how that dotted line comes right to the corner of the block. You want to make sure that you're dealing with the right line. So I'm going to stabilize my ruler. I'm going to cut straight up the edge there. Don't move this piece yet. What we want to do is lift the ruler, remove this piece that we don't need. I'm going to put the ruler back in basically the same spot, and I'm going to pivot it just a little bit. Remember the line that said center beam trim number 2? I have a little piece of my glow line tape on the edge there because that helps my eye to be able to find exactly where that center beam trim number 2 dotted line lays over top of the line that I just cut. So remember this piece that I cut away. When I'm first teaching this to people, I say to everybody, okay, the piece that you cut away that you're not using, if you lay that over top of the corner on the other side of the ruler, what's left, does it look the same? The key thing that you're looking for here is making sure that you've got this coming to a point. If you accidentally line up the broad line, the thicker line that we're going to use for our other fabric, if it comes down to the bottom, this piece that you're trying to match and know that you're trimming off exactly the same fabric on the left and the right side of your block, that piece is not the same as this at all. Anybody can see that. So then we're going to say, stop, wait, something's gone awry. So go back to the first cut that you made, and put the ruler back there and think about just pivoting at the top. So we're going to turn that just a little bit so that that same spot, both of those dotted lines come to the same spot. And then the number 2 line down along the side, you're going to trim off pieces that look just the same as this. And look what's underneath the ruler. We're going to have this really cool pie-shaped looking piece that looks just like that. That's what's underneath the ruler that we're going to have left over that we're cutting off. So I'm going to stabilize my ruler. I'm going to cut up the side, and you can see that those 2 pieces are exactly the same. This one came from 2 sets of pieces, I should say. This one came from this side of the block, and that came from the other side of the block. And this is now our center beam. So that's the real key, is making sure that you have the right lines lined up for cutting. This gives you 2 pieces exactly the same. So we're not going to use them for this particular block, but I'll show you what you can do with them later on. So now you've got your center beam. Now we're going to look at cutting what's going to become the side triangles. And the other piece of information that it was talking about on the ruler here, where it says 5-inch finished units, was strips along with the squares. It's going to be the same height again, but we've left it as a strip. So I would have my long strip, I would have it left wrong sides together. I need mirror images for this. So I've got, as a right-handed quilter, I'm going to cut from left to right. I want a nice clean edge, so make sure you've trimmed your selvage off the end of it. Leave the fold where it is, and that helps you to know that you've got 2 layers because you want to be cutting mirror images. And this just happens to be a shorter piece that was left over from me cutting a bunch of other pieces. But I want to show, in this case now, we're going to be looking at the broad line that on our ruler, I'm going to take that piece off, this actually says side triangles, trim number 1. So that thicker broad line lays along the cleaned up edge of your strip of fabric. And we're not looking at the dotted lines anymore. We're looking at the solid broad line. The bottom of it still comes down to the bottom of our strip for our 5-inch finished unit. So up the side of the ruler, and now we have got our first pair of side triangles that when we open them up, we're going to be able to put them around the center beam that I cut. That's going to give me a unit that will end up looking like this. So first cut's always easy. I've talked about that before. The first cut's easy, then what do we do? So think to yourself, I'm going to go back to where my ruler was positioned, and I'm going to rotate it just a 1/4 turn. It's going to go from this to this. And now we've got a line on here that says side triangle trim number 2. And there's also a little notch down here that says second trim. This is important to pay attention to because, like I was asking you to make sure that you're trimming off the same pieces there, you also want to make sure that your second pair is going to be the same shape as these guys. So if you take this little guy that you've cut and you lay it over top of here, does it look the same? The reason for that stop and check and make sure is because if you accidentally use this same line here but come all the way down to the bottom of the ruler, see how tiny that little piece is, that little notch of fabric down there? It doesn't look the same as this. When I try and lay this over top of this, this is much bigger. That's where our seam allowance is. So we want to make sure that we're using the right position of the ruler. Put that little guy back there. We want to make sure we've got the side triangle trim number 2 sitting along the edge there, and the second trim down to the notch right there. And then I'm able to slide up the side of the ruler, the straight side of the ruler, and now I have another pair, exactly the same as the first pair, that's going to go around the side of my center beam, just like that. So that is your right-handed cutting. If you are left-handed, you're just going to put your strip vertical so that now you're able to lay your ruler on here with the broad line and the strip here that goes along the bottom of your strip of fabric, and you're going to cut left-handed across the top like that. And then when you've got that cut, then you're going to rotate it around just a 1/4 turn here, and then you're going to be able to cut off the second piece. So you're going to go like this, and then, my apologies, I don't cut left-handed, so I had to think about that for a moment. This is the first one. You're going to go a 1/4 turn this way because I'm going to have a piece underneath here. Pretend this jagged piece is what I've cut off so you can see it. That's what I've cut off. I'm going to rotate it like this. I want to make sure that I've got the notch here. I've got this along the line that I cut already. These numbers don't mean anything when we're doing the second cut. We're not looking at these numbers. We're looking at the placement of our side triangle trim number 2 and the place where the notch is to give the second set of triangles exactly the same size from both your right and your left-handed pair. Okay, so that's what we're thinking of doing, is we're going to be cutting both the mirror images from our strip of fabric, and we want to leave that at least 2 stacked together, and our center beam comes from squares. Okay, so then you're looking at this and you're going, how do I line them up for sewing? So what we're going to do to line them up for sewing is, I've got a piece here. It happens to have a dark side triangle, but that's okay. The center is the same. I want to show that you will get the best results if you have a little notch of your center triangle sticking out from the side triangle that you're adding on. I always sew the right one on first, and see how if I line it up like this, there's about 1/4 inch of my center sticking up at the top there, and there's about 1/4 inch of the triangle, the side triangle, pointy triangle sticking out the bottom. It's very important that you pay attention to how you're laying your pieces out. I always cut my pieces and then lay them out, because if you accidentally flip them and try to sew them on like this, that's not going to give you what you're looking for. It shows you a picture of that in the instructions for the ruler with a big X through it. So you want to make sure that you've got your pieces laid the correct way, and when you do that and flip your side triangles over top of your center triangle, you're going to have a little pointy triangle of the one fabric, and you're going to have a little pointy triangle of the other fabric sticking out. If you try to sew them on this way, it's not the right size. It's not going to happen. So again, you've got something that's telling you, wait a minute, something's a little bit fishy. So make sure that you're sewing those on the right way. So then, I'm just going to warm up my iron here. It had cooled down on me. So now with the dark one, you can see that I've got a little triangle, and I've got my seam runs all the way down, and it kind of comes out in the notch down here in between the two sections. Now you can press your seams over, or you can press your seams open. It depends on the size of the project that you're making, the size of the block, as well as how many points are going to be coming together. If we take a look at this pattern here, is called Diamonds in the Sky. I have one of them on the table here. The Diamonds in the Sky has a lot of fabrics that are all coming together. Remember, this is the corner beam block here with the dark center and two different colored fabrics that are the side triangles, but there's a lot of fabrics coming together in the center. So thinking about the pattern and what it's going to be creating, decide whether you want to press your seams open or whether you want to press them over to one side. I usually press them to one side unless I know that I've got something like that happening. If you're pressing to one side, don't forget about your strip stick, because you can use them certainly for a project like this. And I set my seam first. You saw me warm that up. Press it open and over. Then come back in and gently press, and we're pressing. I'm hopping my iron along. Set your clapper on top of it, and then you're ready for the next step. This particular one here, I have got the second side sewn on so that you can see, but I want to show you something really quickly. If you decide to press your seam open like I did here, you're going to have a little bit of a dog ear. If you press it over, you don't have the dog ear sticking out to the side, but if you do press it open, you're going to have a little bit of a dog ear there. So I like to have a clean sight line, so I will just take a ruler. I'm just looking for a straight edge, literally, and I'm just going to clip that off so that I then have a nice straight spot to be able to add my next side onto, so that you've got a nice straight edge. Whether you've pressed your seams over or whether you've pressed them open, there's nothing inhibiting your view for your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So for your second side, you're going to again have a little point of the triangle, the center triangle that sticks up at the top there, and a little point of your side triangle that you're adding that sticks down the bottom. And then you're going to, same thing, whether you're pressing them over or whether you're pressing them open, look at how that sits so nicely. And I'm just hopping my iron along. I don't want to stretch. These are bias edges that we've cut, so we're handling them gently while we're sewing, and we're also making sure that we handle them gently when we're ironing. So now we've got a couple of corner beams that look like this. And it doesn't matter that this doesn't line up exactly along the edge. It doesn't matter that we've got some fabric sticking out at the top here, because now we're going to come in and trim. Like we do with all of the Studio 180 tools, we're going to take the square corner of the ruler, is the trim down side. As a right-handed quilter, I want to be putting the trim down corner in the upper right first, over top of the point. Think about how crisp that point is. It's a very sharp, crisp point. It's even easier to see on this guy just because that's a little darker fabric. This is a little bit lighter. So you want to start with positioning your ruler to encompass and line up around that sharpest point first. So I'm going to point out, we've got side triangle trim number 2 labeled across the line that also is the seam line placement. So the seam line placement is in 2 spots, and those words lay over top of, those lines lay over top of the seams that you have sewn with your side triangles onto your center. So you can see that I'm going to position so that that point on the ruler, let's see if we can see it a little bit better. See how crisp that point is? Right there, we've also got the dotted lines representing the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, where that is going to enable us to be able to see on this lighter block is a little bit easier first. When I trim, when I've got that point right there, and I've got what's going to become my 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, I've got fabric extending beyond my ruler. That's going to be nicely in position. And I'm also looking for, before I make my first trim, the size that I'm trimming it down to. So the cut sizes on the edge of the ruler, the 5.5, represents what I'm trimming this to. Remember, I looked on the numbers first to start with for a 5-inch finished. That means 5.5 inches unfinished. So I've positioned that nicely over the point. These lines are over top of my stitching seam lines, and I've got fabric beyond the 5.5 inches. Now I'm going to give a trim up the side. There's quite a bit of fabric up at the top there. Having a nice fresh new blade makes all the difference in whether or not you cut through it cleanly, or do you have to start to saw. Notice that I pulled my fabric away before I lift up the ruler. I fussed to get it in just the right spot. I don't want to have to reposition it again if I've missed a couple of threads. Lift the ruler, rotate the block. Now you're going to be putting those 5.5 inch number lines, which are your cleaned up edges, along the edge of the block that you've cut. You've got this cool little, kind of like a divot almost, in the ruler there. It's a little arrowhead that says number 5. That's the finished size that I'm cutting. I want that to sit really nicely in the point of the seams between my center beam and my side triangles. Now on the new ruler, what she's done is she's put some little angular hash marks all the way along both of the sides here that are the same angle as your seam line. My Spotlight ruler doesn't have the little lines that give me a double check. It sort of gives me another positioning to be able to say that's exactly where it's supposed to be. So anybody with the new corner beam ruler will have those. My Spotlight doesn't, but I still have this line and this one and this, and I can visually take a look and say, do they look about the same? I can clearly see if they've gone really wonky, but I'm happy with the positioning of that, and I'm going to trim up the side. And again, it didn't matter that this was wonky and uneven down at the bottom. It now is perfectly positioned, perfectly proportioned, doing exactly what it's supposed to. I'm going to show you that again a little bit more quickly with each one of them, but I want you to be able to see, again, the trimming. The sewing's not so bad. The cutting at the beginning, the sewing the pieces together, it is really important to remember to lay them out so that you've got the small part of your side triangle beside the small point of your center, and then another small. So small, 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 wide, wide, wide. That's the way we want to lay them out to get the block to position the way it's supposed to. So again, I'm going to lay these lines over top of my seam line. I'm looking at the point up here, and I'm looking at my 5.5-inch lines, and I'm going to be able to trim up the side. There's not much to trim on that one, but there's a little bit, and across the top. Now, lots of times when I'm teaching classes, I say to everybody, try one with both sides and trim it first. Because see how much fabric was sticking out the bottom of this side triangle here? That was the side that gave me just a little bit of almost dust, didn't it? It almost didn't separate there. So because this one was down so low, it didn't give me very much on the side to be able to trim. So if you do one with both sides and position it for trimming before you chain through a dozen or more of them, depending on the pattern that you've got, that helps you to confirm that where you're positioning your pieces at the very beginning, when you're sewing the first sides on, the first and the second side, it helps you to know that that's a comfortable position for them. It's going to trim up exactly the way it needs to be, because if you can get them closer on the bottom like these guys are, then you're not so worried about whether or not you're going to have enough to trim all the way along. So test it. Test the block, one or two of them to start with. Okay, so isn't that lovely? So you can see how that then is the same as this, where I've got colors in my center beam and I've got background fabric in my side triangles. And depending on what you're doing with them, there are some fun blockbusters. As you know, I love to share the blockbusters that we've got free on the Studio 180 website. So there's one here called Searchlight. Blockbuster number 11 is called Searchlight. And it's kind of cool because in this case, you can see that you can spin around a couple of blocks that have the same center beam, but different colored side triangles. These guys, obviously, I haven't trimmed. They're not the right size yet. But this is a very cool version of this block here. These ones are more scrappy, and these ones give you completely different controls by different colors by putting different colored side triangles on the same center triangle, the same center one in the middle there. That's kind of what I did with this guy, didn't I? I had a layer cake that was all of these scrappy colors, and so I was able to cut them down into some strips that I used my corner beam ruler to cut the side triangles from smaller pieces. It doesn't have to be yardage. It can come from something as as small as the layer cake that I used around the dark centers, and it creates a really scrappy kind of look that gives you a very different scrappy look compared to that one. So that was lots of fun to be able to create two very different looking kind of corner beam quilts. So let's see what else we've got here. When I look at the patterns that I've got laid out here, Diamonds in the Sky, this one here is the pattern that this guy is. So in the pattern, they've got a black background with all kinds of scrappy colors. And this one actually came from the pattern called Doubly Charmed. And I chatted about this a little bit when I was doing the video for the V block, because this pattern, these trimmings, the second quilt here actually comes from the trimmings of the V block portion. You get two patterns from one set of charm squares, and that's kind of cool. So check out this pattern if you've got the V block and the corner beam. You can do the two different patterns from the one group of charm squares. Now that I've mentioned the word V block, I'm going to say to you, how many of you thought to yourself, I've seen this ruler, I've seen the shape of it. When I did the video for the V block, it was this one, and it is the same basic shape. When I lay these on the table, stand them up on top of each other, the shapes are the same of the actual ruler. The side angles are the same. The side angles for my V block pieces are the same here, but look how different those blocks look. We've got shapes where we have a point in the corner compared to a point in the center of the side, and we've got the bottom of that beam coming down to the sides. This time we've got the bottom of the triangle coming out to the corners. So while we may cut the sides the same, we cut the centers completely differently. There's a different little picture icon on each of the rulers, so make sure you're picking up the right one to give you the right shape that you want. But it was lots of fun to be able to say, okay, I wanted the V block to do one version of that quilt, and then I got my corner beam ruler to be able to do the corner beam shape that gave me this quilt. And it's very, very cool. You actually are using, this is a bad example here. This actually shows you having a color in the center and the background here, whereas the actual quilt that I made out of it was reversed. It had the color in the star points for the V block version. Hang on a second, I have that here. I'll dig it out and I'll show it to you. Okay, so I know this is a rough setup here, but I just quickly wanted to show you the difference between these two. So in this case, the corner beam quilt was made first. Remember, our square cut off and gave us some side triangles. So in this case, each of these colors started with a square, cut off the side triangles, and then they became the side triangles in the V block portion of that particular pattern. So from the 5-inch squares that I had for using in this particular pattern, I got the two quilts by using the cutoffs from the corner beam. And remember, I showed you when we were cutting off the sides of the corner beam unit here, these became the side triangles for the V block portion of that doubly charmed pattern. I've had lots of fun teaching that to lots of different groups, and everybody gets a big kick out of the fact that you can expand the use of those leftover pieces. Those of us that have any recycling and Scottish tendencies want to be able to see more happen with our fabrics after we cut some pieces away. So that's a big one. Alrighty. So I wanted to point out the difference between the V-block shape and the corner beam shape. Two different end results from rulers that may look a little bit similar. Alrighty, so those are the basic corner beam shapes, but wait until I show you what else you can do with your corner beam ruler. Hang on. Okay, I'm back. I've got some more stuff for you to see because you know that Deb Tucker has created some technique sheets that go along with an awful lot of her rulers. And she's got one that is for the corner beam. And you know that I've pointed out that in the upper corner of the technique sheet, she always shows which ruler to use it for. The technique sheet has a chart with a bunch of different sizes for creating different sized blocks. There are great written instructions, picture instructions, lots of things to highlight, to point out, to watch for, some block suggestions, as well as, in this case, we've got some great left-handed and right-handed trimming instructions as well, which is really helpful because there's some cool stuff we're going to do here using the corner beam ruler that's going to look a little bit different from the basic corner beam unit. And the reason for that is we're not actually going to start with that square that we cut into the center beam. In this case, we are actually going to start with a half square triangle. So I'm going to move this a little bit over to the side, and I'm going to bring this in. So when you want to be making a block that's going to finish, for example, at 4 inches, it tells us that we are going to start with squares that are 5.5 inches. So we're upsizing the size of the square to be able to make our starting half square triangles. Now in this particular case, I'm making a smaller block than that particular size, but I worked out with the size of the square to be able to make the size that I'm looking for. Hang on, I have a ruler here. Let's double check this. What size did I start with? So I started with a 4.5 inch pair of squares. So I've got a light and I've got a dark, and I drew my line and I sewed 1/4 inch on either side to be able to create a couple of half square triangles. So I'm going to take some half square triangles and I'm going to sliver away part of it. And what you can do is there are actually 4 different ways that you can work the sliver process. You can sliver away the background piece, you can sliver away the color piece, you can have the sliver angling left, or you can have the sliver angling right. It all depends on what the block is that you are looking to make. There's great instructions in here about what to watch for as to whether you're slivering left or are you slivering right. And it also talks about pressing your seam allowance. Think about one of the reasons we're oversizing it as much as we do is because we want to be able to have the seam out of the way, press it away from the side that you're going to sliver away, and we're going to have the ruler sit just a little bit below that intersection where the seams are. So in this case, if I'm looking to make this be a 3-inch finished, remember I said I had a 4.5-inch square that I was starting with. So this must have been a line from another project I was making. So if I'm making a 3-inch finished, and my half square triangle started from 4.5, then I'm going to be looking at the 3-inch finished line on my ruler. So what I'm looking for, let's make sure that we can see this well underneath the overhead camera. Because what I want to show is for a 3-inch finished unit, I'm using the dotted line because think about you're going to take away a smaller sized triangle and you're going to add an oversized side triangle. So you want to press your seam allowance away from the side that you're going to be cutting off so that that bulk is not under your ruler, and you want to line it up so that the dotted line is going to create a pointy piece that you're taking off. And she shows that on here. She shows an actual little blow up version of the positioning of your ruler so that you can see it's supposed to be up there, not coming to the point. That's important. You want to give that little bit of space and have it lying on the bottom underneath the size of the finished unit that you're making. So you're going to cut away a little piece that looks like that. And then you're going to take the size of the side triangles, starting strips for side triangle pieces. She's got that information there for you. This came from a 4-inch strip of fabric, cut exactly the same way that I did for the brown pieces that I showed you just a few minutes ago. So I've cut myself a side triangle to go onto there. Now, depending on whether or not all of your pieces are angling the same way, if you're making a whole bunch of them that are all angled the same direction, you're only going to want to cut one layer of fabric at a time for your side triangles. You don't need mirror images if they're all going to be angled the same way. And think about whether or not you want the side triangle to be facing this way so that it is going to lay on your piece like this, or if you're having it face on a sliver right, this is not going to give you the right direction. You're actually going to need to flip your fabric over so that it's the wrong side facing up, because you can't flip the ruler to cut that. You can flip the fabric though. So if you want the fabric to be laying the right direction for a right sliver, then flip the fabric over so that you can cut it the right way with the ruler. She's got all of that detailed on the information on the technique sheet as well about how to be able to cut your fabric in the right direction, and then you're going to be adding your pieces. So when I'm adding this guy onto this one here, I'm going to be lining it up pretty much. We're not worried so much about that tip hanging over top and bottom like we did on the regular corner beam piece. We're going to pretty much line it up where the cut stopped and started. So now it's going to have a sort of a really wonky looking piece like this. And then you're going to be able to, after you've sewn it on and pressed it over, now think again about how sharp the tip is here, and you've pressed one seam going out this way. Press the side triangle that you've added going out the opposite way so that you don't have fabrics trying to butt over top of each other on that top tip. So then when you're getting to the trimming part for this, you're going to again look at the squared off corner of your ruler, put that point up into the top corner, and we're doing the same thing. We want to have the seam placement line over top of our stitching seam, that point right into the corner, but our fabric doesn't come all the way down to here with our other seam. We want that seam to be running right down the center of all those little arrows that are coming down the middle of your square block trimming. So visually, we now have a line here for our seam placement. We've got the little arrow points down here. We've got 3.5-inch cut size lines. We've got lots of fabric here to be able to trim, lots of ability to position this around just so, because remember we made our starting half square triangle a bit bigger to give us room for the trimming and to give us room for a good ability to place it just so that when we trim this down, it's going to give us pieces that are all perfectly proportioned. Then we're going to trim the first 2 corners and then lift the ruler, rotate the unit around underneath, and do the same thing. We're going to line it up so that we've got the lines coming down the center and the cleanup lines where they need to be, and then we're away to the races. And these blocks are what I used when I was making this guy. So I did sliver units up in here and sliver units up in here. This is very cool. This particular block came from the back of one of the design sheets. There's a design sheet for the corner beam that walks you through the regular corner beams as well as the sliver units, and I got a couple of my blocks from the back of the design sheet. This one here, there's a corner beam in the corner. We've got a square squared in the center, and we've got a V block with a corner pop on it. There's a lot going on in this block, but it's really pretty, isn't it? That's this guy up in the top corner that I made with that one. And I loved how the corner pop adds that right angle corner of color for a star look. The corner beam here comes this beam of light coming from the corner of the block in towards the center of the block. Now, when you look at this block here, we've got, I had a little thing here to help highlight it. So this is a regular corner beam block, just like these guys were the regular corner beam block. This one beside it is a sliver block. So is this one. So is this one. These guys actually are the mirror images that I was talking about before. This one is a sliver right. This one's a sliver left. When you think about positioning the block so that it's got the color down at the bottom, like this guy does, there's a sliver right unit up there. This one, when you turn it around, is also that sliver right unit, but it's not this guy. Just rotating the block doesn't do that for you. Using the other block is what gives you that particular positioning. So now we've got this one here to give us the sliver left, and whoops, slippery little sucker. There's our sliver left, there's our sliver left, and there's our sliver left. So it creates another whole level of interest, doesn't it? It makes you look at it and try and dissect what's going on, because then these colors are feeding into a regular corner beam in the center again. So you can really dazzle people with a block like this. They're going to look at it and go, how the heck did you do that? And you can say, oh, that was my corner beam ruler. And I did regulars and I did slivers. I did sliver rights and sliver lefts. And look at how cool that is. That also came from one of the blocks suggested on the design sheet from Tucker University for the corner beam tool. This one here, when you break this guy down, it's got another whole level of something going on. Let's take a close look at it, because it's also one of the ones on the back of the design sheet. And I had a lot of fun helping people figure out how to do this particular one. This block here started out as a half square triangle, and then I slivered both the left and the right side of that guy. So that particular block was like this one with another piece that had been slivered off of it. This here is a regular corner beam block. It just happens to have two different colors of fabric as the side triangles. This block up here isn't a corner beam at all. This block and this block are actually split rectangles. Remember, I did the split rex ruler a couple of months ago. In the fall, I had some fall fabrics, etc. I was showing you with that. Those are split rex blocks. These are double sliver blocks. These are regular corner beam blocks. And it creates such a cool, dynamic kind of looking block. It's exploding. It looks like diamonds. It looks like prisms. It's all around cool. And I used that double sliver kind of idea for this particular block here. So I've got a sample of some of the pieces up here on the board to show you. Again, you are starting with an oversized half square triangle. So that's what this is here. And then you're going to sliver away a little bit of each of the sides. You're going to sliver away some of the blue, the dark blue, and some of the multicolored blue using the lines on the corner beam the same way that we did before. And think about the positioning of your half square triangle. Do you want them all to be positioned the same so that you can spin them around like this? Make sure that you're slivering off going the right direction, because if you want to sliver like this, make sure that you've got it positioned so that you're able to, for a 4-inch finished, that's what I had that line there before from, line up at the bottom, the dotted line, so that you're cutting away the purpley color there. And then you're going to do the same kind of thing. To do this side, you're going to flip your block over so that you are able to position it the way you want. And the same idea. Think about how are you going to get what side you're cutting off. Does the block need to be right side up or wrong side up when you're doing something like this? So, lots to think about, some very cool stuff. Adding your side triangles once you've slivered those pieces away is exactly the same as what we did before for these little guys, where it was just the one side, and sewing them on, it's going to give you a piece that looks like that. So when you get to the trimming of it, you're going to now actually have two seam lines, aren't you? You're going to be able to have two seam lines up into the point, and you've got the center seam line coming right down the center of your block there. Lots to see. You've got your 4.5-inch cut size to be able to trim this little gem down to 4.5-inch blocks and create a very cool block like that. That was lots of fun to make. Had some people create that in a lot of really cool colors. And it's dynamic. And these are the kinds of blocks, the kinds of shapes that when we looked at them before, they were paper piecing patterns that wanted us to create that particular shape. So now we know how to get them doing something completely different. So I've got a few more blocks on here to share with you, and they come from Blockbusters. So give me just a minute to clear the decks, and then I'll put those pieces out. Hang on. Okay, I'm back, and this time I'm going to chat about the Blockbuster number 26. This one's called Cactus Blue, and that's this very cool little one here. On the second page of this particular blockbuster, there are 3 different layout ideas. They all have the same components, but there's 3 different versions of what you can do with them, which is kind of cool. I really like when there's a variety of things that you can do with the pieces that you're making to give you some very different kinds of looks. So I have a bunch of pieces here that are my corner beam pieces. You can see that I've got them, and in this case, yep, I've pressed the seams open. I had lots of seams that are going to be coming together. Remember I talked earlier about looking at the block and kind of analyzing when you look at all the pieces that are coming together. Are you going to have some seams that are going to join, and maybe you want to press the seam open to reduce some of the bulk? So I'll show you on the back of this guy what it looks like. When you press that second side open, you can see on here I've got the first side pressed open, press the second one open as well, and you don't end up with as much bulk in at the joining spots where your blocks are going to come together. Okay, so here's my little block here, and now you can see that it's quite flat here. I don't have a really big lump right there, and I've got a whole bunch of these. There's 4 for each block, so I'm just going to take a moment and press those over, because that is the part that is the outer corner. Can you spy where they are in the block? Can you spy where those bigger ones are in the outer corners? It does make these a little bit more fiddly sometimes to press them open. There we go. Just my finger wasn't popping in there very easily. So get that pressed and over. And the last one. It really does make quite a difference in the bulk of your block. Something else I should mention, when I start talking about pressing your seams open, make sure that you shorten your stitch length. You want to be sewing with a shorter stitch length if you're going to press your seams open so that they don't start to come apart. So these guys are the blocks that are out here, but something else has been done to them. Can you recognize what that is? That's the corner pop that's been added onto the corner beam. Now, wait, don't get too confused. Remember the corner pop ruler that we had that adds a pop of color onto an existing unit. So think about, there is that block before it's been trimmed down and before the corner pop has been added onto the corner beam. So let me show you really quickly sort of the difference in what these blocks can look like. So I also have the little baby ones, because did you see the little ones in the center? Do you recognize that that's a corner beam too? It's really cool how the fabric placement, the value of the fabric placement, creates that diamonding shape in the center from the dark. And when you are pressing and creating these blocks in a smaller size, even more advantageous to press your seams open. So taking a moment to press those seams open when they go smaller, because there's shorter seams and even less space for that extra fabric to go, isn't there? There's even less room to hide bulky seams, less ways to be able to press them out of the way if you've got 2 or 3 or 4 layers of fabric all trying to come together. So make sure that you look at eliminating the extra bulk if at all possible. So I'm going to show you how to trim up a couple of different sizes of these guys as well. And I know that I've shown you some of these steps with right and left-handed cutting. Don't forget that in the instructions that come with all of Deb Tucker's rulers, there are fabulous pictorial instructions for how to hold the ruler for right and left-handed cutting. Sometimes it's as easy as turning the strip vertical instead of horizontal, like I showed you at the beginning. And most of the time when we are squaring up the block and we're going from, as a right-handed person, the first cuts, the right angle corner is going to be in the right-hand side. As a left-handed quilter, you're going to have that right angle corner, the key point, in your left upper corner so that you can trim them down. Most of the time it's as simple as that. Every so often it's a little bit more involved. But what I want to show you is when we've got these little guys, it's the same idea. I was making a 12-inch block. So on the Blockbuster, it shows that on the 12-inch, I have corner beams that are finishing at 4 inches. That's what this guy is. I've got corner beams that are finishing at 2 inches. That's what this little baby is. I've got wing clipper units. That's what these guys are, the flying geese units. Then they are a 2x4 finished. So remember way back when I did my wing clipper but wait video, I went through all the steps of that. If you haven't seen any of my previous videos, be sure and check them out. That flying goose component is in so many patterns. We see it all the time in so many different patterns. But we're going to sew a couple of them together and put them together with the corner beams. There they are. I lost them. And this is what I'm looking at to be creating the unit, the block that I've got up there. I'm going to show you the trimming of the little guy. It's exactly the same. We've got the important corner up there in the top right hand. And if this guy is going to finish at 2 inches, I'm trimming it down to 2.5. So I want to make sure when I'm cutting that I've got fabric beyond the 2.5-inch lines on my ruler, that I've got the lines on the ruler over top of the seam lines. I'm going to trim up, go through all that fabric that's up at the top there, lift the ruler, rotate the block, line up those cleanup lines underneath the 2.5-inch lines, and I've got that little arrow with the number 2 right there down into the center, and I'm going to give that a trim there as well. And it didn't matter that there wasn't a very much fabric, there was just enough. Now you can't tell that it was at risk of being a little bit short, because now I'm going to be able to take all of these little guys and pop them into the center here, and that's what's going to create the very cool center of this block. So these little guys here haven't been trimmed. They're not as small, but you get the idea. You can see what it is that I'm doing. Those are all going to come together to create that very cool center star. The dark of my flying geese units is going to come down the side here, and I've got corner beams coming into the corner there. So it creates a little bit different look by not having the corner pop on here. But before I add the corner pop, let's just take a look at the placement of the other guys. So my block here is this version here. If I spin just the outer edge blocks around, the outer corner blocks, if I spin them around, then I'm going to be able to see this particular layout. So we've got the beams coming out into the outside edge of the blocks. And if we leave those in the first position and rotate the center corner beam units so that these guys now have the white going out and the dark that comes together in the middle, it gives us the third version of that particular block. Pretty cool, eh? 3 different color placements, color versions, by just rotating a couple of the pieces. Now, but wait, you say, but how do I get that corner pop one? Remember on my corner pop video, I talked about following the pattern instructions or following the instructions that come with the ruler to determine what you're going to be cutting off. In this case, she's actually got information for us. Finished size, cutaway size on the corner pop tool, and the trim down line is 2 inches for what we're going to be trimming off of here. But I want to caution everybody, remember when I was talking about the corner pop tool, your base unit, whatever it is that you are trimming down, has to already be trimmed to the right size. So it's important that you take the time to trim your corner beam to the 4.5 inches unfinished, 4-inch finished size that it needs to be before you add the corner pop onto it. So there we go with that. Because you can see what I'm trimming away. If I left that on and then tried to add the corner pop onto the bottom end of this here, it would give you a very different kind of positioning. This unit needs to be already to the correct unfinished size. So then what I would do is I would come in with my corner pop tool and I would trim away the size that it says on here is my cutaway corner size of 2 inches. That's what's going to go over top of the part that I'm cutting away. I'm cutting that little triangle off. I know from my chart that came with my tool what size of squares to cut in half to give me the triangles to add that turn that block from being a plain, not that it's plain, but it's a little bit different, isn't it? It's got a different visual by being light corners all the way around there compared to bringing that brown in from the flying geese that gives it that another level of the diamonding visual. So you guys know how much I love to play with blocks. This is what I do. I love to play with what they're going to look like. Sometimes I spend longer choosing my fabrics because you get completely different visuals. I'll spend longer choosing my fabrics than it takes me to sew the blocks together. But I have fun at it. I really, really enjoy it. And that's what I want to be able to share with everybody. And now you can start to see how I'm building the blocks in the Blockbuster series, building them through the Tucker University blocks from one to another as I've been building the series of videos for you to help you with your comfort level of what you can do with your tools. There's another piece that was missing from that pile. So that is the sliver technique sheet that I showed you. That is the corner beam design sheet that I showed you that created several of these blocks. That's one of the blockbusters that I showed you, the cactus blooms one. And I'm going to walk you quickly through the next one as well. And then I have a couple more quilt samples to show you. Hang on, we'll do a quick change, just a minute. Okay, I'm back again. You can see the blockbuster that I've got over here. This one is number 57 and it's called Beacon. So do you recognize the shapes that are in this guy? When you look at this, we've got the corner beams. They're your regular corner beams angling in and out and in and out. And what's this shape here? This is the offset 4-patch. You guys remember when I did the video for the 4-patch square up tool, and it has the icon for the 4-patch on here and helps with when you've got a pattern that's got 100 different 4-patches that you need to be creating and you want them all to be the same size, it's your go-to for that. But it's so nice to know that it also had something more to do with it. And I covered the offset 4-patch technique sheet for it. So I brought that out when I'm looking at the instructions that are on the Blockbuster. And this is, like I said, number 57. And it shows for a 6-inch, a 12-inch, or a 16-inch block. And that's what I have up here is a 16-inch block, because these guys are each 4-inch finishing components. There were 3 different coloring kinds of ideas for color placements whether you wanted light in here, or did you want sort of a darker color in there? Did you want to control and keep it all in one family like the blue one here? I really enjoyed bringing out some of my Kim Deal fabrics, and people are going to say, but Leanne, it's not batik. You're right. I do work in other fabrics. They're not all batik blocks that I make. And it was so cute to bring in a couple of tealy green ones along with the black with the green on it, and that's so cool. Can you imagine the secondary design that you'll get if you create a whole bunch of these blocks, or sash in between them and create, you could put a little 4-patch up in here and sort of continue on with the whole 4-patch, offset 4-patch, corner beam kind of theme, or just make a big one and border around it, and you've got an amazing table topper or a wall hanging or something. So that one was a lot of fun to create with the offset 4-patch blocks and the corner beams in it. And again, there were 3 different sizes. It tells you on here what size of finished unit and unfinished units that you're looking for, and then you're able to refer back to the technique sheets that are involved and the instructions that come with the ruler. If you know that for the 16-inch block that I was making, I need 4-inch finished corner beams, I'm going to the side of the ruler again and looking to see that it comes from strips and squares that start at 5 inches. There's so much information that's available both on the rulers and on all the supporting documents and papers and patterns and technique sheets, etc., that come from Studio 180 Design. She's got videos for so many of these. Every ruler has a video to go with it, and almost all of the technique sheets, some of her very newest ones she doesn't have a video out yet for, but all the rest of them she does. And there are even additional blockbusters that I didn't have a chance to be able to make. There is blockbuster number 50 that has got a very cool visual of framing. It's got corner beams in it, it's got sliver units, and it's got a wedge star in the center. Now, I had made something a while ago that looks quite a bit like that, and that's this guy here. This is one of the blocks that's on the wall behind Deb Tucker when she's actually doing a video for the Liberty Lemoyne Star, which is what's in the center there. Lemoyne Stars are the very first Studio 180 tool that I started working with, and they are very cool, near and dear to my heart. I haven't even got into them yet with you guys, but when I saw that, I said I want to make that, and started to break down the components that were in it. It was a little bit similar to this with the sliver units. Did you guys recognize that those are mirror image sliver units that are framing around something in the center? It could be the Liberty Lemoyne that I've got there. It could be the wedge star block that's in the center of this. It could be an embroidery block. You could do so many different kinds of things. And then in the corner, it could be the corner beams that are in the blockbuster here. In this case, I had shaded 4-patches. Go way back to the first video that I did for the Tucker trimmer. How many remembered that it was the Tucker trimmer that does the shaded 4-patch for you? So there's a technique sheet for the shaded 4-patch. We did the technique sheet for the sliver units. Those are your mirror images left and right. What started out as the half square triangle in these? The half square triangle to start with was the brown and the green. And then I slivered away the green. It's always the same color on here that I slivered away, but I slivered left and added the red, and I slivered right and added the red going this particular way. So think about the direction that you're slivering things away, what you want it to do. Do you want it to frame like that? Do you want all the pieces going the same direction? It's so cool to see, to take some information that you've seen in a pattern or in a just a visual of somebody showing up a block, whether it be Deb Tucker or whether it be anybody else, doing things that excite you, and you can break them down. You know how to Tuckerize things, and you know how to create the different kinds of what you're seeing using the tools that I've been sharing with you. I have 2 other quick patterns that I want to show you, and they also use the corner beam, because again, they look very different. And that's what I'm all about, is you never know what's going to excite somebody and inspire you. So hang on, a couple more quick changes and I'll be right back. Okay, here's another one up on the board here. This pattern is called Country Birds. And this is one that actually was written as a paper piecing pattern. When I got it, it had page after page after page of newsprint with the paper piecing shapes drawn right onto it. That's not the way I made it. That's not the way I wanted to make it, because I was able to recognize straight away when I saw the pattern that that was the corner beam shape. But it's twisted and turned, and it really makes you think. You have to break it down, take a look at what you're seeing. So do you recognize that? Let's see if I can get a thing to frame around the right sizes. So we have got regular corner beams here. We've got regular corner beams here. We've got corner beams that have, this guy here actually has two different colors of side triangles on it. We've got its mirror image up here doing the same thing. It's got two different fabrics on your side triangles that is going to give you this visual of a different fabric that's framing around here. We've got regular corner beams in here and in the center coming together in different kinds of ways, but because the colors are controlled between your lights, your mediums, your darks, and the color placement in your side triangles around certain center beams creates a very different kind of visual. I loved how this one framed around the corners. I loved what it did in here with this fabric framing around in here. And these guys over top of here, that's really visual. There is your corner beam block there. It's lined up exactly the same positioning as a corner beam block here, but this color matches that. This is another corner beam block that matches that, that gives you that really cool arrowing in from the side kind of look. I can't help it. These kinds of things excite me. I want to break down patterns. I want to see how it's created, where the intrigue comes from, where the movement and the play comes from, and stuff like that really does it for me. So taking something like that, that I know the pattern was written as paper piecing and I bought it from the pattern writer, but I didn't make it the way she did, but I loved her inspiration for the colors of the fabrics and what she did with it, and how I was able to create something that will be really cool when it gets quilted. Eventually, people, eventually. So hang on a seckie, another one to come. Okay, I'm back with another one. This pattern here is actually called North Star, and it is, I'm going to hold the other side of it up. This one has 3 different sizes of your corner beam block in it. This was the first thing that I taught using the corner beam ruler, and it is so cool to see the big one in the center, and then it's ringed around by scrappy, slightly smaller ones, and then it's ringed again around by little ones that come out even out into the border. This is a Studio 180 pattern, and she put it out quite a while ago, and it was very cool to create. And this quilt would be stunning as a square quilt turned on point on the center of a neutral colored duvet on your bed is just spectacular looking. And that's what this is. This is a 52.5-inch square quilt. So think about taking something like that and turning it on point. So the stars are on point and the quilt is on point, and it would just glow off the center of a bed, and it would be really cool. And it was so much fun to make. This was like I said, the first thing that I taught, this was what I had bought my Spotlight ruler for. Don't forget, if you've got it, it's still the same. It'll do all the same things that the corner beam, but you're going to want to look at the video for corner beam. I don't think you can see videos for Spotlight ruler anymore, but she's got great videos for the corner beam ruler and for the sliver technique sheet that I showed you guys. So that was also an awful lot of fun to make. And I shared once before with you guys my northern neighbors, didn't I? Do you remember we were talking way back then about the flying geese that are part of it, and it's got split Rex units in it, and now comes the last bit, the corner beam that makes such a cool center for the point of your maple leaf. And it is an amazing block to be able to pop into your leaf, whether you're making a placemat, whether you're making a wall hanging size, or whether you're making the king size quilt that lots of people did during our sesquicentennial year. There was a lot of quilts that got made out of this, and now I've walked through all the components to work with you guys to be able to make this. And it is so cool. I love all the things that I have done with my corner beam ruler. I love what I've been able to create, the variety of things that I've done. And don't forget that you can use the cut-off pieces from the center beams that you've got, just cut them down to become smaller side triangles for another unit. They're the same shape of what you are using to be able to make the side triangles, and you just cut them down to a little bit smaller, just like I showed you with the doubly charmed pattern that we had. So these do not have to go to waste. They can be turned into other smaller units that you can then turn around and create V-block units or smaller corner beam units. There's lots of them there that I have taken them and trimmed them down and used them for additional blocks and even split Rex units. They make great split Rex units because the angle is the same on all of those rulers. So that's sort of like the last little bit where I'm going to say you can cut that down with your V-block ruler. You can turn that into a teeny tiny little corner beam block. And they're the same all the way from a 1-inch finished unit up to a 6-inch finished unit and all the 1/2-inch sizes in between. So have fun experimenting. I know that you're going to start to recognize these kinds of shapes. You're going to see them when you look at other patterns, and you're going to say, I can do that. I know how to create all of those shapes. Leanne's walked through all of them with me, and I hope that you've enjoyed yet another tool from Studio 180 Design but wait, there's so much more we can do with it than just the basic unit. Have some fun exploring. Thank you so much for dropping by. It was great fun to share this with you again. Can't wait to see what I bring out for the next one. Haven't planned it yet, but it'll be good. Take care, everyone. Be good. Bye.